Hello and welcome back to Whiskey Uncorked. My name is Brian and we're back today with another whiskey review. This time of an independent bottling of Caol Ila from Signatory Vintage. If you go back to the beginning of my channel intro video and my review of Del Ewan that was also from Signatory, I talk a little bit about why I want to make videos around independent bottlings, why I wish more people would talk about independent bottlings, and touched a little bit on why I think this notion that we should only watch videos or we should only make videos about whiskeys that a lot of people can go out there and buy. There's a lot of personal value I get out of watching people discuss bottles that I'll probably never, almost certainly never be able to try. And that's okay. I think that there's still a lot of interesting conversations, that you can still get a lot of information, that you can educate yourself about the larger whiskey industry and what bottles are available, and fill in some gaps in your overall whiskey knowledge, even without tasting it yourself. And I do wonder how many other people feel the same way as I do, where I actually think that independent bottling reviews are more entertaining, maybe even more educational, more informing for at least someone like me. But if you're interested, stick around after the review. We'll talk more about independent bottlings, why I think they're important, why they've been important to me, and why I like hearing people talk about bottles that, yeah, I'm never going to be able to buy and I'm never going to be able to taste. But before we get into all of that, let's just jump right into the review and talk about this bottle of Caol Ila. All right, so let's get in some details about this bottling before we get into the notes. This is from Signatory Vintage. It's distilled at Caol Ila. It's 11 years old, distilled on the 13th of May, 2011, bottled on the 8th of March, 2023. It is finished in a second fill Madeira Hogshead, which is one of the reasons why I chose to pick this one up. There were a total of 357 bottles. It was bottled at 60.5% ABV. And this is exclusive to Binny's, which is a chain of liquor stores in the Chicagoland area. So I chose to pick up this bottle because I've got a bit of a confession to make. This is actually the first bottle of Caol Ila I've ever actually bought. Now, I have some Compass Box bottlings that are almost completely Caol Ila. I've got, like right now, No Name number 2 is open. That's like 75% Caol Ila. I've certainly gotten to try some over the years, have always enjoyed it, but bottles like this 10-year-old cask strength Caol Ila, particularly from Signatory, are pretty common, at least here in the States. I'm sure probably if you're in the UK or even Europe, they're probably even more readily available. But they're easy to kind of walk past. They're easy to say, I'll get one next time. They're just something that, you know, Caol Ila doesn't get a ton of conversation, but when it is talked about, it's always super positive. It's pretty difficult, from my understanding, to find a bad bottle of Caol Ila that even, you know, regardless of what sort of cask was used, it's probably pretty good. I think the saying I've heard before is it's pretty hard to screw up Caol Ila. So there's never like really any pressure to actually buy a bottle. But I've been really into Madeira finishes lately, or Madeira influences. They've really been hitting the spot for me. I definitely prefer it right now over kind of just your standard sherry. Maybe it's just because it's different, but I'm just, in general, I'm a big butterscotch toffee fan. I don't eat a lot of candy or cake, like sweets, that sort of thing. But when I do, oftentimes it includes, there's a lot of caramel, peanut butter, toffee, butterscotch, that sort of thing. So Madeira fits really well into that because those are notes that I pick up quite a bit when it comes to Madeira influenced whiskey bottles. So this last Christmas, when I saw that they had an 11-year-old Caol Ila, but it was finished in second fill Madeira barrels, I'm like, I'm finally doing it. I'm not going to pass on this one. I've got to buy a bottle of Caol Ila. It's kind of embarrassing. Now, I don't drink a lot of heavily peated Islay scotches, which again, I got a little bit of a backlog of them anyway, so I try to like be pretty picky and choosy about which ones I buy. All right, well with that, why don't we finally get into some nosing and tasting notes? Here we go. All right, on the nose. So even though I haven't had like a ton of Caol Ila in my life, it feels like I have. Caol Ila is one of those whiskeys that it's kind of in the middle of the road in terms of Islas, at least in my opinion, right? You have your big medicinal Lefroys, you've got, you know, big ashy, meaty, you know, whiskeys from like Lagavulin and Ardbeg and these sorts of distilleries, where Caol Ila kind of fits in the middle. It's not too much one way or the other. It's not even, I don't really even pick it up as super smoky, right? It's a combination of smoke and peat, which are two separate things that usually get lumped together oftentimes, but they're definitely separate. This is kind of a nice balance between them. Even at 60%, this isn't like blasting you in the face with like a super dense, intense smokiness. Now, in addition to that peat, you're getting a maltiness, you're getting maybe a touch of icing sugar, but really most of that sweetness is coming from a honey. Now at first, when I first opened this bottle, I think it was a little bit more butterscotch, but since then it's just become just unequivocally honeyed. So on the nose, this is coming off as a pretty sweet whiskey, and I don't typically go for super sweet scotch. I usually tend to stick more on the bourbon side of things for that, but this one's actually working pretty well. Now it is not overly complex. You're really getting the peat, the honey, and then maybe a touch of like orchard fruit, primarily pears. It's pretty light in terms of the fruitiness. I probably wouldn't really even call it out if I wasn't really trying to look for something in there that's fruity. All right, so overall the nose is pretty nice. It's not complex. I kind of describe it as reassuring. It's almost comforting. It's kind of like there's some baking desserts. It's just something about it is relaxing. It's like, I guess it kind of has like a comfort food sort of feeling to it, even just the way it smells. And I just kind of really enjoyed sitting back and just kind of getting that waft of sweetness, a little bit of doughy, a little bit of pastry. But yeah, it's just kind of calming. I just really enjoyed nosing it, but it's definitely not complex. It's not doing a ton, but what it is doing is good. All right, so on the palate, this thing is coming in at 60.5%. Now, typically my opinion generally is that Scotch does not work nearly as well at these really high ABVs as bourbon does. At bourbon, 60% ABV or 120 proof, we're just kind of getting started with some of those super big, bold, cask strength whiskeys. So for usually once we start getting up into that 57, 58, 59, 60 plus % range in terms of Scotch, I'm considering adding a whole bunch of water. Now, the good news is that when you get the higher ABVs, like there's really the intention is that that's probably what you do, and you can really pinpoint the exact amount that where the whiskey starts to sing for you and what your personal preferences are. Now, this one, again, just over 60%. I don't think it needs water. I'll talk about kind of the changes that I saw with water after I get the tasting notes, but I just wanted to give you the heads up that, yeah, this one is actually pretty drinkable even at 60%. All right, let's get some tasting notes out for you. Cheers. All right, up front, you are immediately hit with that honeyed sweetness. There's some vanilla in there, well, actually a pretty surprising amount, particularly up front. The proof, again, is evident. It's got some punch. If you're more sensitive to proof, you're probably going to want to put some water in this thing straight away. But for me, I actually still enjoy it even at the 60% level. Kind of towards the mid palate though, you do get that pretty big crescendo. The peat starts to kick in. Not overwhelming. Again, it's peaty, it's smoky, but it isn't a beast. That sweetness really has tempered it quite a bit. And then on the back, some of the pear fruitiness starts to come in as like the intensity fades. A little bit more of the nuance is able to kind of come through. But yeah, you can even go so far to say maybe some grilled pineapple. I don't quite go so far as pineapple. I'll say grilled pears. The peat does give a little bit of a charry character to it. Maybe even comes from the barrel. Generally, overall, the palate is very pleasant. It's thick, it's mouth coating, it's sweet, it's peaty. It doesn't necessarily go wildly in one direction or another. It stays pretty evenly keeled, even despite its big ABV. It's loud, but there isn't one voice that's necessarily dominating. Yeah, additionally on the finish, you're getting some white pepper. There's that kind of drier maltiness kicks in. Like as the intensity fades, some more of these things that you could kind of pick up on the nose start to kind of appear, which is nice. The finish is good, it's pretty long, and generally speaking, it's a consistent experience all the way through. All right, so one weird note that I got the other night that I debated whether I was gonna mention because it's kind of funny. But I was sipping on this, I was taking some of my initial tasting notes, and I had one of those moments where I tasted something and your brain's just immediately like, I know what that is. And a lot of times when I'm doing tasting notes, and I know that a lot of you probably as well, right? If you're trying to do tasting notes, it can be hard. You know, this is sweet, this is this and that. But putting like really clear like words that where you're confident that that's what that is can sometimes be hard. But every once in a while, something just hits you like a ton of bricks. And this was something that transported me back like, what, 30 years? I'm 10 years old, and what am I eating? I'm eating McDonald's chicken nuggets and I'm dipping it in their honey sauce. Now, especially 30 years ago, I'm not sure how much chicken was in McDonald's chicken nuggets, and I'm not sure how much honey was in their honey sauce. And if you're not from the US, you may be lucky enough to have them have your country hold McDonald's to a little bit higher food standards. But we get what we get in the US, and as a kid, you're gonna love it regardless. But as I'm sitting there, it just hits me. And like I said, I was transported back to being a kid. I'm like, there is no way that is not McDonald's chicken nuggets and honey sauce, right? Again, whatever's in their chicken nuggets, it doesn't quite taste like chicken. And whatever's in their honey sauce, it doesn't quite taste like honey, but it's pretty good nonetheless, at least as a kid. I am not a fan of their chicken nuggets now. In fact, I think they're kind of gross, but I can still remember eating them as a kid and loving it. And for at least a few sips out of this, a couple nights ago, late at night, getting ready for bed, just kind of wrapping things up, working on this upcoming video, and it was just a moment that I had that I thought was kind of funny. All right, so in terms of a score for this thing, I've really enjoyed this. I think I've said before in my videos, like I don't necessarily drink a whole lot of super heavily peated Ilas. It's not really where I am right now overall, although I will say I have been drinking them a little bit more frequently lately, and I've been enjoying them quite a bit. Again, I'm not saying I don't like them, they just tend to be things I reach for on a less frequent basis. Now again, this is kind of defying expectations on a couple of fronts. One, it's heavily peated, and B, it's a really sweet scotch. And typically those are two things that either I don't reach for a lot or that I kind of look elsewhere for those sorts of experiences. But this has just been kind of really comforting. That same experience that I was getting on the nose where you kind of just wanted to sit back a little bit, and it's not a complex whiskey. That is one thing. You're not getting layers upon layers of different flavors. It's doing what it's doing. But it's doing it really well, and it toes some lines and being maybe a little bit too much this or a little bit that, but it never crosses them. And it's big, it's bold, it's straightforward, it's slightly unique in its honeyed sweetness. It's not quite the Madeira experience I was hoping I would get. Now, knowing it was second fill, I wasn't sure exactly what that was going to present itself as. And it was a little unexpected, but there's no denying that I have really enjoyed drinking this, and I kind of imagine that as far as my heavily peated cask strength Islay whiskeys go, this bottle is going to disappear a lot quicker than a lot of the other ones. In terms of a score, this thing's pretty easy. This is a clear 7 out of 10, which is very good. And yeah, I don't have any qualms about giving it a 7 out of 10. It's not a stunning, amazing, holy crap whiskey. It's certainly better than average. This is just one of the more enjoyable overall whiskeys that I've opened more recently. And I love the fact that I don't really have to think too hard about this unless I start getting chicken nugget notes. All right, so I did try adding water to this. So that score kind of encompasses primarily the neat experience. I don't think it changes too much with water. I haven't really talked about how much I incorporate, like what I would give a whiskey that I've added water to, if it gets better or worse, how that affects my score. Typically, adding water will never hurt a score. If it gets worse with adding water, I don't hold that against the whiskey. If it gets better, I may reserve the right to bump the score up a bit. All right, so adding water, I tried a couple times. The best experience that I had, I felt like I had kind of nailed how much water it was. It was a pretty decent amount. 60% Scotch usually takes water pretty well. And on the nose particularly, where I felt it was a good balance of change in the nose and the palate, and I'll get into a little bit why in a second, but the nose kind of came down to what I imagine a good quality 46% Caol Ila probably tastes like, with a little bit more honey. The peat definitely kind of stepped up into the forefront, with the sweetness kind of melding a little bit more into the back, and this is all on the nose, because on the palate, man, the volume was like, if neat, the volume starts like at a 5, and then that crescendo's like a 9, and then it kind of comes back down to like a 6, and then it kind of slowly fades. Adding water on the palate really kind of made it just like a 7 all the way through. It stayed big, it stayed bold. The oiliness really started to show clearly. There was some separation happening with the water and oil. Probably could have let it sit maybe a little bit longer, but I don't really regret that, because it just ended up being this like much more even experience overall, but still very intense. It definitely didn't lose a ton of punch. It just kind of brought down some of those spikes from some of the peak volume levels towards the back of the palate. In terms of flavor changes after adding water, it was also a bit of a plus, because the honey sweetness turned more into a bit of a honeycomb, right? So it's a little more rich, a little less sweet, almost more of a waxy flavor, not necessarily waxy on the texture, but I like that. Honeycomb on whiskey is one of my more favorite notes, because it's sweet, but it's not too sweet. And it's something you can pick up on bourbon and in Scotch, usually in Scotch for me, at least in my experience so far. But yeah, overall, I do think adding water probably made the overall experience better. I feel like the nose didn't improve as much as the palate did, but at the end of the day, I kind of weight palate a little bit more heavily, unless the nose is utterly like divine. All right, so let's talk about value. At Binny's, this bottle is $110 is like the sticker price. But if you have a loyalty card, and I think this is kind of the way with most of their like exclusive picks, if you sign up for their store card, like you get a discount on most of their exclusive barrels, and this is no different. So when I bought this over the Christmas holiday, it was $100 plus tax. If you're in Chicago, they have one of the highest sales tax rates in the country, so you're probably paying $110 out the door. Now, 11 years old, $110. Second fill, finish. I was pretty skeptical. I was coming into this thinking like value is probably even at best. But then I started thinking about it, and if the words on the bottle were Ardbeg instead of Caol Ila, I cannot imagine that this bottle is less than $300. And that's just based on some other single barrels that I've seen from Ardbeg. Even less than 11 years old. Those things can get crazy. Now, being a signatory bottling, the price is probably at least controlled a little bit. I've seen like Ardbeg branded single barrels go. It's just insane what those things sell for, and they do sell. They don't sit on the shelf. They still sell out immediately. But yeah, I can't see this going for less than $300. If you have an example of something that is similar specs and it says Ardbeg on the bottle and isn't 300 bucks, please let me know. But yeah, so if it's Ardbeg, compared to Ardbeg, fantastic value. If it's Lagavulin, now they're 12-year-old special release from Diageo, that typically retails at about $140 to $150 plus tax. So $100 for this, let's say $140 even for the Lagavulin 12. Obviously the cask influences change on that, but yeah, still almost a 50% difference in value there. Lefroy, as an example, I looked around even on Binny's. I think they had an 11-year-old Duncan Taylor bourbon cask Lefroy at Binny's. That was $150. In contrast, they also had I think it was an 8-year-old, their kind of Lefroy branded Binny's exclusive PX matured. That was $250. And the closest thing that they had was $120 single malts of Scotland. I didn't check the casking. It looked bourbon to me. And then just finally, if you're going to look off of the island of Islay, Total Wine, at least a couple of weeks ago, they had a 9-year-old Lechic special release, Bordeaux matured. I think it was like 56.8% ABV. That's coming in at $145 plus tax. So it turns out this is actually a fantastic value. The closest thing you might be able to compare, again, is going to be a Lefroy, so the profile is going to be very different, but their Carchus release, which is also an annual release, last year was a white port and Madeira version, and that comes in at $80 to $100 here in the States. You can find it for 80 bucks. I think around here, 90 is probably a little bit more common, and some places are charging as high as 100. Now, the problem with that is Carchus is non-age stated, so it's almost certainly at least a few years younger than this is, and it's coming at 52 point something percent, depending on the year. Last year's was 52.3 for 2023. So unless they revert back to doing something at a higher proof or cask strength, you're losing about 8% compared to this bottle of ABV. So at the end of the day, right now, at least here in the States, it's pretty difficult to find something that's super comparable in terms of quality, ABV, age statement, and price. All right, if you've made it this far and you want to hear me talk even more, we can talk a little bit about why I think that independent bottlings should be talked about more in the whiskey tube community, just in the whiskey enthusiast community, because a lot of us probably drink independent bottlings to some extent. And that's not just independent bottling. Sometimes it's special releases. Sometimes it's maybe older bottlings. I've had some friends over the years that are really generous with letting me try some bottles long gone. And some of those bottles are great. Some of them are pretty good. Some of them are kind of eh. But overall, it's fun to taste that sort of stuff. And I always appreciate the opportunity to. But yeah, there's not a whole lot of channels that make a point of talking about bottlings like that. One of the reasons is as I mentioned earlier, you can see people make comments like, why are you making videos, or why would I watch a video about a whiskey that I can't purchase myself? And I have kind of the opposite question, is like, why would I want to watch a video of a bottle I can walk to a bar and try? Why would I want to watch a video about a whiskey I could walk to the store and purchase? Now, I know the answer to that, right? Because you're trying not to buy bottles of whiskey that you don't like. And even if they're available, doesn't mean that it's okay to just go drop $50, $60, $70 on something that ends up not being something that you enjoy drinking. So I kind of have to admit that maybe my perspective is a little bit different than most people's. And it probably started back when I was really into craft beer here in the United States. Now, when I was really into craft beer, I wasn't nearly as much of a nerd in terms of how is it made and really kind of getting into the nitty-gritty of it. I just really liked drinking craft beer. It was delicious. It was a flavor adventure. And I never wanted to drink the same thing twice, basically. I was always looking for something new. There's always new releases coming out. So it's very rare that I would actually order the same beer 2 times, either from bars or going back to buy more from the store. I'm a little more prone to do that today because I focus more on the whiskey side of things, and I don't drink nearly as much beer. And when I do, I usually just grab one of the more obviously good available, like IPAs or lagers or something that one of the local breweries here has made. So that mentality has really carried over into whiskey. I do want to try everything. I want to experience everything there is. I love whiskey, and I'm much more nerdy about whiskey than I ever was about beer, where I want to learn as much as I can about the process, about the people, about the history. It's just way more interesting to me than beer ever was. Although I still certainly enjoy my craft beer adventures, whiskey has certainly struck a chord in me where I want to know everything I can and taste everything that I can. But obviously, with the limitations of drinking whiskey and drinking alcohol in general, and things that are what's available to me and what's not, I have to rely on other people to fill in some of the gaps in my knowledge, at least right now. Now, maybe in 20 or 30 years, I will have amassed as much information as anyone else, and I can speak intelligently about everything else because I've tried so much more. And maybe I'll feel like, although I didn't get to try every single bottle that was ever released, obviously, that I have a pretty good grip on it. But right now, I feel like I rely on other people, particularly online, through YouTube, to tell me about things and walk me through what's available and what exists and what seems to work and what doesn't. Additionally, there's channels like Malt Reviews and Mike and Narby, who I don't think have made a video in a while, and I hope at some point they come back and talk about some of the most epic whiskeys, the best whiskeys ever bottled that they've been lucky enough to obtain and try, and then they are nice enough to tell us about them. So I've never felt angry about someone sharing their opinions on reviewing, talking about a whiskey that I can't obtain for one reason or another. Either it's too rare, it's just not available, it's long gone from years ago, or I just can't afford it or justify the price that it goes for. I'm never going to be angry at someone for sharing that experience with me. I might be jealous, but that's a completely different thing altogether. And usually it's a jealousy that's based in positive vibes. So what do you guys think? Do you get frustrated when people talk about bottles that you can't actually taste yourself, that you can't go acquire for a reasonable price? Is that content that you just seem to ignore, which actually, if you're watching this, you don't do that because you stuck through this whole thing towards the end. But I don't know, do you guys have opinions on that? What would you rather see? Are you more interested in the kind of the more accessible, available, value-oriented core range bottlings? Or do you like channels that are able to review the most epic whiskeys that have ever been made? Do you like hearing about my experiences with specific independent bottlings and kind of what you may be able to expect if you were to stumble across something similar to this in the future? Because I'll probably still talk about the things I find to be interesting and the things I want to talk about because we kind of have to, otherwise what's the point? But obviously there's some wiggle room for leaning one direction or the other. I doubt my channel will ever just be completely independent bottlings or special releases from 4 or 5 years ago that, you know, I've had on my shelf nursing for a while. Although if you enjoyed those videos, check out the Long Row Red video that went live last week. A little bit different style, a lot shorter, got it under 10 minutes, which was a massive achievement for me. And we'll see how that one does. It just went live this morning, actually. So we'll see how that goes. All right, that's going to do it for me today. Thank you again to everyone who's been supportive of the channel, liked, commented, subscribed. I've appreciated all of it. It's been a lot of fun, especially getting some interaction from you guys. That's kind of what I've always wanted. And that's really the true reason why I started this channel, is to actually be able to engage in some conversation with people around the world. But until next time, which hopefully won't be long, maybe another Last Drops review this week, but definitely another review next week. Until then, cheers.